Welcome back to the Deep Dive. If you've been walking this path with us through the Simplified UPSC series, you know we are in the middle of, well, constructing a massive mental model of the Indian economy.
It really is like building a house, isn't it?
It is, exactly. Part one, that was the foundation. You know, the macroeconomics, the growth numbers, all that fiscal deficit stuff.
Concrete and steel.
The concrete and steel. Parts two and three were the walls, the plumbing, the heavy machinery, all that infrastructure, the roads, the energy. And today
is different.
Today, we are finally talking about the people who actually have to live inside this house we're building.
That is a perfect way to frame it. We are diving into part 4, Kartavya 3, Sabka Saath Sabka Vikas.
Now, I have to be honest with you. When I first saw Sabka Saath Sabka Vikas as the title for this section, I admit I rolled my eyes a little bit.
I think most people do.
It's a slogan we've seen on every billboard, every campaign poster, every government ad for the last decade. It usually just translates to, good vibes for everyone.
And that's a common reaction, especially for the cynical policy observer. It often feels like marketing fluff or just a catch-all phrase for welfare.
Right.
But if you actually strip mine the budget speech and the detailed annexures this year, you realize something interesting. They've operationalized the slogan.
Operationalized it? What do you mean?
They've turned a vague political promise into what looks like a logistical supply chain.
So that's our mission for this deep dive.
Mm-hmm.
We're going to decode how the government plans to bridge that gap between those shiny, high-level GDP numbers we talked about in part 1 and the actual messy, complicated reality of a farmer in Odisha, a woman entrepreneur in a village, or a researcher in a STEM lab.
And we have a massive agenda today, a huge one. We're looking at 4 main pillars.
Okay, lay it out for us.
First, Agriculture 2.0, which involves some, surprisingly futuristic AI tech.
Ooh, I like the sound of that.
Second, a really important structural pivot in women-led development. Third, social justice, specifically for the vulnerable. And finally, a massive geographical bet on Eastern India, the Purvodaya Plan.
A thread tying all of this together seems to be access. Is that fair?
That's exactly it. Access to resources, access to markets, and maybe most importantly, access to dignity. It's not just about handing out checks anymore.
It's about building the pipe so people can access the economy themselves.
Precisely.
Okay, let's start with the biggest chunk of the population and, the most critical sector, agriculture.
Yeah.
But I want to be clear. We aren't going to spend the next 20 minutes talking about fertilizer subsidies and irrigation canals.
No, we've done that in previous years. That's old news.
The headline in this budget is completely different. It is digital.
It is. They are calling it Agriculture 2.0, but I would almost go a step further. I'd call it algorithmic agriculture. The centerpiece of this whole strategy is an initiative called VISTAR.
I do love a good government acronym. Okay, let's unpack it. VISTAR. That stands for Virtually Integrated System to Access Agricultural Resources.
It's a mouthful, I know, but the concept, I think, is genuinely revolutionary for the Indian context. To understand why, you really have to look at how a farmer currently makes decisions.
Okay, let's play this out. I'm a farmer. I wake up in the morning, I walk outside, I look at the sky.
Exactly. You look at the sky, maybe you talk to the elder in the village who says, "My knee hurts, rain is coming."
Right.
Or maybe, if you're lucky, you listen to a radio program or an extension worker visits your village once a month and says, "Farmers in this district should plant soon."
So it's generic advice. It's kind of like reading a horoscope. Today is a good day to avoid risk. Doesn't mean anything specific to me.
Precisely. And farming is hyper-local. What works for your neighbor just across the path might not work for you if your soil drainage is slightly different or if your plot gets more afternoon sun.
So how does VISTAR flip this model?
Okay, so it's an AI interface, but the real magic isn't the AI itself. It's the data that it sits on top of. That's the crucial part.
The sources mentioned it integrates 2 massive data sets. There's the AgriStack and something called the ICAR package.
Right, so think of the AgriStack as the Aadhaar for land. It's a digital registry of farmers, who they are, exactly where their plot is geolocated, and critically, the specific soil health card data for that plot.
So the government knows the nitrogen, phosphorus, and potassium levels of my specific square acre of land.
They know it down to the micronutrient level, and that's one half of the equation.
And the other half, the ICAR package.
That's the brain. The Indian Council of Agricultural Research has decades, literally decades, of scientific data, everything from seed genetics, pest life cycles, weather correlations, water requirements for different crop varieties. VISTAR merges that general scientific truth with the specific reality of your land.
So, okay, instead of the radio announcer giving me that generic advice, what happens now? How does it actually work for me, the farmer?
You have a smartphone. Or maybe you don't. Maybe you just have a feature phone. The app, or even a voice bot that calls you in your local dialect, gives you what I'd call a precision strike.
A precision strike.
Yes. It analyzes your soil card. It checks the hyperlocal weather forecast for the next 72 hours. It sees that there is a pest outbreak reported 3 kilometers away from your farm.
Wow.
And it tells you, in your language, based on the moisture in your field today, applying urea tomorrow morning is a waste of money because it will rain heavily by noon and wash away. Apply potash on Wednesday instead, and by the way, you should spray this specific pesticide to prevent the pest that's coming from the neighboring village.
That's a fundamental shift. It moves from what you'd call advisory to decision support. It's not telling you what might happen, it's telling you what to do.
It is risk reduction. That is the core economic concept here. Farming in India is essentially gambling with the monsoon. You are betting your entire livelihood against the weather gods every single season.
You're trying to reduce the number of variables you can't control.
Exactly. If you can use data to slightly weight the dice in the farmer's favor, you aren't just increasing their yield by 5 or 10%. You are stabilizing their income. You're making it predictable.
And this ties into that broader digital public infrastructure, or DPI narrative that we see everywhere with this administration. It feels like they are trying to do for farming what UPI did for payments.
That is the perfect analogy.
Create a public rail that anyone can plug into.
That is exactly the logic behind that 100 million farmers platform mentioned in the background notes. We are digitizing the farm itself. But, and this is a very, very big but.
Go on.
You can't eat data.
Right. Even if the AI is perfect, even if my execution is perfect, if I'm growing a low-margin crop on a small plot of land, I'm still poor. I'm just a more efficient, poor person.
Which brings us directly to the second part of the agricultural strategy. High-value agriculture. This is the big pivot away from just food security to income security.
We've basically solved the calorie problem, right? As a country, India produces enough rice and wheat.
We have surpluses, massive surpluses. But the economics of growing wheat and rice on a 1-acre farm are brutal. You simply cannot become wealthy growing staples. So the budget is now aggressively pushing farmers toward crops that actually have a decent margin.
And I noticed a few specific commodities that are getting what looked like the global brand treatment. Cashew and cocoa were the two that stood out.
This is a very targeted play. Let's look at cocoa first. India loves chocolate. Our domestic consumption is skyrocketing year on year, but we import a huge chunk of the raw material, the cocoa beans.
Which seems silly because we have tropical climates in the south and parts of the northeast that are absolutely perfect for growing it.
Exactly. So the government is asking, why are we sending foreign exchange out to import this? The budget proposes a dedicated mission to make India self-reliant in cocoa. It is classic import substitution.
Okay, so that's cocoa. But for cashew, you said the game is different.
It is. We are already a massive processor of cashew. We import raw nuts, process them, and export them, but we don't have a strong brand identity.
So we want to be the premium seller, not just the middleman.
Right. We want Indian cashew to be like champagne from France or Darjeeling tea from, well, Darjeeling, a protected premium global brand. The goal set out in the documents is to transform these into premium global brands by 2030. It's about capturing the value add, not just selling the raw nut.
It's the difference between selling grapes and selling a fine wine.
Precisely. Speaking of high value, there was another crop mentioned that feels, I don't know, almost cinematic. Sandalwood.
Ah, yes. The fragrant gold.
You're smiling. You know the history.
Of course. It has this mythical status in India. I immediately think of Virappan smuggling entire forests locked down by police. For years, growing sandalwood was a legal nightmare, wasn't it?
It was a complete regulatory disaster. The laws were so strict that if a sandalwood tree happened to grow naturally in your backyard, you technically owned it, but you couldn't cut it, you couldn't transport it, and you certainly couldn't sell it without navigating a complete labyrinth of permissions.
Which, of course, created a perverse incentive.
A terrible one. Nobody planted it because it was a liability, not an asset. So the only supply came from poaching in wild forests, which created the entire black market.
And the budget is trying to reverse that.
The budget explicitly mentions restoring the glory of the Indian sandalwood ecosystem. Now, that language implies a massive deregulation is coming. They want to partner with states to make it legal, easy, and crucially profitable for a farmer to grow a sandalwood tree, harvest it in 15 years, and sell it to a perfumery without going to jail.
That is a cultural revival and an economic deregulation all wrapped up in one policy. Very interesting.
It is.
Now, staying on this theme of high value, we have to move from the land to the water, the blue economy.
This is a sector that often gets ignored in mainstream media, but the policy changes mentioned here are, I think, really fascinating and incredibly clever.
Okay, there was a detail about the the exclusive economic zone and duty-free fishing that I think most people probably just skimmed over. But it sounded like a massive tax loophole, or maybe a massive tax incentive.
It is a massive structural incentive, and to really understand it, you have to look at the logistics of deep-sea fishing.
Okay, walk us through it. What's the problem they're trying to solve?
Traditionally, Indian fishermen, even with trawlers, stay relatively close to the coast. But the real value, the massive tuna shoals, the high-value squid, the catch you can export for top dollar, is way out in the deep seas,
Right.
in the EEZ and beyond.
Right.
The problem is getting it back. The new policy says this: if an Indian vessel goes out to the high seas, or the EEZ, catches fish, and then lands that fish at a foreign port, it is treated as an export of goods.
Okay.
And crucially, the catch itself is free of duty.
Wait, hold on. So they don't have to drag all that fish back to Mumbai or Kochi?
No, and that is the absolute game changer. Imagine you are a fishing captain. You are 500 nautical miles out in the Arabian Sea. You have a massive catch, say 50 tons of premium tuna.
Okay.
If you have to burn incredibly expensive diesel fuel to steam all the way back to an Indian port, offload it, get it processed, and then put it on another ship to go to Japan or Thailand.
Your margins are destroyed just by the fuel cost alone.
Absolutely destroyed. It makes deep-sea fishing economically unviable for many operators. This new policy allows you to sail from the fishing ground directly to a port in, say, the Middle East or Southeast Asia, sell the catch right there, and the Indian government counts that transaction as an export.
It turns the fishing boat into a floating mobile export factory.
Precisely. It incentivizes the private sector to go out and buy those expensive, modern deep-sea vessels because the unit economics finally make sense. It is a very, very smart way to boost marine exports without building a single new port in India.
And while we're on water, the sources also mentioned developing 500 reservoirs and Amrit reservoirs for inland fisheries.
Yes, so the strategy is dual-pronged. Go deep for the high-value exports, but at the same time, use the vast network of inland reservoirs and lakes for local food security and livelihoods. It's about aquaculture for the domestic market.
Okay, so that's the farm of the fish. That's a lot to take in already. I want to pivot now to the second pillar of our discussion. We've covered the production side of things. Now let's talk about the workforce, specifically women-led development.
And you have to note the language change there. It is not women's empowerment anymore.
Right. I'm glad you pointed that out. Empowerment always sounds a bit patronizing, doesn't it? Like, I have the power, and I'm graciously giving you a little bit of it.
Exactly. Women-led development has a different feel. It implies that women are the architects of the economic engine, not just passengers. The budget really signals a shift from women just participating in the workforce to women owning capital.
The flagship initiative here seems to be these She-marts, which stands for Self-Help Entrepreneur Marts.
It is a catchy name, but you have to look at the structural gap it's designed to fill. Over the last decade, we have created millions of self-help groups, or SHGs. We've focused heavily on credit access. We've created the Lakpati Didi's women earning over $1 lakh a year.
Right. But usually they're producers, aren't they? They make pickles, they weave baskets, they do embroidery.
And then what happens? They sell it to a middleman who comes to the village. Or they wait for a government mela or a fair that happens once a year. They don't own the retail channel. And in business, he who owns the customer owns the profit.
So She-marts are meant to change that dynamic.
She-marts are proposed as community-owned retail outlets. So proper shops in proper markets, but they're managed by the cluster-level federations of these SHGs.
So the women own the shop. They own the brand.
They own the real estate, the brand, and the customer relationship. It is the graduation from microcredit to microenterprise. It allows them to capture the retail margin, not just the production wage. That is where real wealth is created.
That's the rural side. What about on the other end of the spectrum? Let's say highly educated women in academia. There was a very specific infrastructure promise that jumped out at me. A girls' hostel in every single district for higher education STEM institutions.
Yes. Now, usually the union budget doesn't get into the weeds of building dormitories. That's typically a state subject or a university problem.
So why the federal intervention here? Why is the finance minister of India talking about hostels?
Because the data shows what's called a leaky pipeline in STEM. That's science, technology, engineering, and mathematics. In India, girls actually do quite well in undergraduate science. The enrollment numbers are surprisingly good.
Okay.
But as you move up the ladder to masters, PhDs, and high-level postdoc research, the numbers just drop off a cliff. The pipeline is leaking talent.
Is that purely social pressure? Pressure to get married and settle down?
That's certainly part of it, but a huge, often invisible barrier is simple logistics and safety. Think about it. Serious science research requires long, unpredictable hours. You're in the lab waiting for a chemical reaction to finish until 10 p.m.
Right. I can see that.
If you are a girl student who's come from a village and you're living in a rented room across town in a district headquarters, safety during that late-night commute is a massive, massive anxiety for you and for your parents.
And parents will often just pull their daughters out of the program.
They do. They'll say it's simply not safe. So the government is using viability gap funding, or VGF, to build these hostels specifically to plug that leak in the pipeline.
It's an infrastructure solution to a social problem.
That's the perfect way to put it. If you provide a safe, on-campus, well-lit environment, you remove the safety veto that families often exercise. It unlocks all that human capital that we are currently losing for a completely preventable reason.
I really like that framing infrastructure solution to a social problem. That segues perfectly into our third pillar for today, social justice. This section focuses on Divyangjan, that is, persons with disabilities and the vulnerable.
And here, too, you can see that same philosophical shift we've been talking about, a move from charity to economy. Look at the Divyangjan Kaushal Yojana. Kaushal means skill, but look at the sectors they are specifically targeting.
The list was IT, AVGC, which is animation, visual effects, gaming, and comics and hospitality.
Exactly. They aren't training people for, basket weaving or candle making, which has been the unfortunate stereotype for disability vocational training for decades.
They're targeting high-growth, modern sectors.
It makes perfect sense, doesn't it? IT and animation are largely desk-based jobs. If you have mobility issues, it doesn't matter one bit if you are a brilliant coder or a talented 3D animator. Your physical disability is irrelevant to your productivity.
So it's treating the disabled population as a talent pool that is currently underutilized, rather than as a burden that needs care.
Exactly. And to support that, they have the Divyangjan Yojana, the support scheme.
This is where the assistive technology marts come in.
Right. And again, think about the user experience. Currently, if you need a hearing aid or a caliper from the government, what do? You fill out a form, you wait for months, and then they mail you a standard one-size-fits-all device. Take it or leave it.
And often doesn't fit properly, or it's the wrong type for your specific condition.
These molds are designed to be try-and-buy centers. You go there, you get assessed, you test out different types of equipment, you find what actually works for your specific physiology. It creates a market for better assistive tech, and more importantly, it gives the individual the dignity of choice.
And the budget also mentioned scaling up Alimso to meet this demand.
Yes, Alimso is the public sector unit that makes these aids. The plan is to modernize and scale up its production to supply these new marts.
Before we leave this social justice section, I have to highlight the specific mention of mental health. It wasn't just a throwaway line, it was a specific point about upgrading institutions.
Yes, that was significant. They explicitly mention establishing in Imahans 2 a second campus of the world-famous National Institute of Mental Health and Neurosciences, and also upgrading the existing mental health institutes in Ranchi and Tezpur.
10! Even 5 years ago, you would never see mental health get this kind of specific capital expenditure billing in a union budget speech.
Never. Mental health was considered a rich person's problem, or worse, something to be hidden and ashamed of. But I think the government is realizing that trauma, anxiety, and depression are massive economic drags.
How so?
Well, if you look at the vulnerable sections we're talking about, migrant laborers facing uncertainty, victims of domestic violence, people living in conflict zones, the trauma load is massive. An unwell mind cannot be a productive worker.
So by explicitly funding these institutes, they're signaling that mental health is a state responsibility. It's part of the public good.
Exactly. It signals that mental health is a fundamental component of public health infrastructure, just like vaccines or sanitation or clean drinking water. It is a maturing of the definition of healthcare in India.
Okay, we've covered the sectors agri, women, social justice. Now we need to look at the map of India, because there's one specific region that this budget is betting the house on.
The East. The Purvodaya Plan.
The rise of the East. I feel like we've talked about looking east or acting east for a long, long time. What makes this different?
Because it's not just a foreign policy slogan anymore, it's a domestic industrial corridor. If you look at India's economic map, it's dangerously lopsided. The West and South Maharashtra, Gujarat, Tamil Nadu, Karnataka are the powerful engines of industry and services.
And the East.
The East Odisha, Jharkhand, Bihar, West Bengal is what economists call the resource curse region.
Rich in minerals, but poor in people.
Rich in minerals, rich in water, rich in labor, but poor in industrial output. For decades, we have dug up the coal and iron ore in the East, put it on a train, and shipped it to the West to be turned into steel and cars. The value addition, the factory jobs, the wealth creation all happens in the West.
So Purvodaya is fundamentally about keeping that value addition in the East.
Correct. And the spine of this entire plan is the Integrated East Coast Industrial Corridor. And they specifically name the industrial node at Durgapur. But the real game changer, I think, is the logistics. The new Dedicated Freight Corridor, or DFC, connecting Dankuni to Surat.
Okay, visualize that on a map for the listener. Dankuni is just outside Kolkata in the east. Surat is the industrial heart of Gujarat in the west.
It is a massive diagonal line cutting right across the belly of India. It's an economic artery. It physically links the mineral heartland of the east with the textile, diamond, and trading hubs of the west. It dramatically lowers the friction of moving raw materials one way and finished goods the other.
And then there's the water. You mentioned the river economy.
This is the unheralded hero of logistics. They are focusing on National Waterway 5 and WD5 in Odisha. This connects the massive coal belts of Tulchar and Angul directly to the deepwater ports of Paradeep and Dhamra.
Why the water? Why not just build more railway lines?
2 words: cost and carbon. Moving a ton of coal by a river barge is significantly cheaper and emits far, far less CO2 than moving it by a train, and it's not even comparable to moving it by truck. But we have never really used our vast river networks for freight in a modern, systematic sense.
And to make that system work, they are setting up ship repair ecosystems in Varanasi and Patna.
Which I find absolutely fascinating. These are ancient cities, religious hubs. Varanasi is the spiritual capital of the country. Patna has immense history. Now they're being reimagined as inland maritime technical hubs.
It's a clash of eras, almost.
But it's practical. If you have hundreds of barges plying the Ganga River system, they're going to need maintenance, they'll need repairs. That creates high-skilled technical jobs, welders, engineers, mechanics, smack in the middle of Bihar and UP. It changes the economic identity of those cities from just tourism and pilgrimage to industrial support.
Speaking of changing identities, there was a cultural angle to this Purvodaya Plan as well, wasn't there?
Yes, a very smart one. They are setting up a new National Institute of Design, NID, in the eastern region. This is so important. The East, especially the Northeast and Bengal, has arguably the best and most diverse handloom and craft heritage in India. Bamboo crafts in the Northeast, incredible textiles in Bengal.
But often they lack the modern packaging or the design tweak to make it a global product.
Exactly. They make beautiful, authentic things, but they don't necessarily fit the aesthetic of a modern apartment in New York or a boutique in Berlin. An NID located in the region bridges that gap between traditional craft and global design.
And what about the Buddhist circuits in the Northeast?
That is a geopolitical and economic play rolled into one. It's aimed squarely at the Southeast and East Asian tourist. Think Japan, Korea, Thailand, Vietnam, Cambodia.
The cultural link is Buddhism.
The cultural link is Buddhism. By building out that pilgrimage circuit, improving roads, hotels, signage, you are practically inviting your high-spending neighbors over to explore their religious roots and, of course, spend their money.
So it's industry, logistics, and culture, all converging on the East. It really is a holistic push.
It is. It is a genuine attempt to rebalance the Indian economy so it isn't flying on just one wing anymore.
I want to touch on one last sector before we wrap up this part of the discussion. It often gets ignored, but for the rural poor, it is absolutely critical. Animal husbandry.
Or, as it's often called, the ATM of the poor.
That is a great analogy. Explain that. What does that mean?
Well, if you're a small or marginal farmer, your crop income comes once or maybe twice a year. You harvest, you sell, you get a lump sum of cash. Then you have to wait 6 months. It's lumpy and unpredictable.
Right.
But your cow gives milk every single day. That's daily cash flow for household expenses. And if you have a sudden financial emergency, a wedding, a hospital bill, you can sell a goat.
It's a liquid asset. You can cash it in quickly.
Exactly. The budget notes that livestock now contributes to about 16% of total farm income, and for the poorest, that percentage is even higher. But the biggest problem is health care for the animals.
They have a massive shortage of vets, right?
A massive, crippling shortage. If your ATM, your prize cow gets sick, and the nearest government veterinarian is 50 kilometers away and may or may not be available, you are in serious trouble. You might lose that entire asset.
So what's the solution proposed in the budget?
The budget is introducing a loan-linked capital subsidy to encourage the private sector to set up veterinary colleges, hospitals, and labs.
So essentially privatizing the vet infrastructure to speed up the supply of professionals.
That's the idea. The government realizes it can't build these specialized colleges fast enough on its own. So it is incentivizing private players to step in and fill the gap with a stated goal of adding more than 20,000 veterinary professionals to the ecosystem.
It sounds like a small number compared to the billions of dollars we talk about elsewhere.
It is, but for that one family that depends on those 3 or 4 animals, having a vet nearby is not a small thing. It's a critical safety net.
It all comes back to that theme we started with, doesn't it? Risk reduction. Whether it's an AI telling you not to waste fertilizer today, a hostel keeping you safe while you study physics late at night, or a vet saving your family's only cow.
That is the social contract of Kartavya 3. The government is effectively saying, we are building the hardware, the roads, the ports, the freight corridors, but we are also upgrading the software, the skills, the health, and the capabilities of the people.
So for the UPSC aspirant who's been listening and taking notes, how do you file all this away in your head?
This is your prime fodder for GS2, Social Justice, and GS3, Economy and Agriculture. And my advice would be, don't just memorize the scheme names like VISTAR or She-marts. Understand the underlying philosophy, the shift from entitlement to empowerment and from generic welfare to precision delivery.
I want to leave our listener with a final thought on this section. We've talked a lot about digitizing the farm with VISTAR and creating these massive data stacks.
Yeah.
As we automate agriculture, as we make it more data-driven, how do we ensure the digital divide doesn't just create a new kind of caste system? You'd have the data-rich farmer versus the data-poor farmer. If the algorithm relies on inputs, and the poor farmer can't afford the sensors or even the smartphone, does the AI inadvertently widen the inequality gap it was meant to shrink?
That is the billion-dollar question, isn't it? Digital public infrastructure is a fantastic concept, but the word public implies that it must be accessible and usable by the last person in the last mile. If the system is optimized only for the guy with a 5G connection and a new smartphone, then we have fundamentally failed the mission of Sabka Saath.
Something to chew on. We've covered how the money will be spent on the people, on the vulnerable, on the future. But as the economists always say, there's no such thing as a free lunch.
Someone has to pay the bill.
Next time, in Part 5, our final part of this series, we are tackling the topic everyone loves to hate, but everyone absolutely needs to understand. Taxes. Direct, indirect, and the logic behind all the levies.
It is, dare I say, going to be a taxing discussion.
I see what you did there. Thank you for listening to this deep dive. This episode was custom generated for you, the learner. Review your notes on She-marts, the blue economy, and Purvodaya, and we will see you in the next one.